From unbelievable seasons to unbelievably bad and shocking starts, I want to transition to the NFL. We're 2 weeks in the books, and obviously, what makes the NFL so unique is the intrigue. And the first 2 weeks have certainly provided a lot of intrigue, a lot of shocking starts to the year. And sure, there are certain teams that we expect to be good, that it's not shocking or surprising that they're good. The Bills, the Chiefs, the Bucks, right? The Rams, even the Chargers that are one-on-one. There are certain teams that the Eagles we expected to be better. There are a lot of teams that we just expected to be good this year. And then there are other mind-boggling teams that have had shocking results through the first couple of weeks. And it's really kind of baffling. And again, the amazing thing about the NFL is the short turnaround from one season to the next. You can totally improve your roster and your team within one off season. You can go from bad to good, mediocre to great in one off season. It's just kind of one of those unique sports where we see that. And now it's just week 3. 2 weeks are in the books, but there are a couple really, really unimpressive teams. Now, as far as what's the most disappointing, well, people might want to say, well, what about the Cincinnati Bengals? They're 0-2. They lost to Mitch Trubisky and the Steelers at home in overtime because of a missed extra point or blocked extra point and 4 interceptions from Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow hasn't looked like himself yet. Then they lost to Dallas with no Dak Prescott. Cooper Rush is the starting quarterback. That's pretty disappointing to be 0-2 when those are your two opponents. And it's true. But at least the Bengals, again, they reached the Super Bowl last year, so that's why people were disappointed. They just reached the Super Bowl. You'd think they'd want to play more inspired and they'd be more motivated and hungrier coming into this season like we're seeing with the Buffalo Bills. But nonetheless, you can make the argument to the defense of the Bills, well, Joe Burrow is recovering from an appendix injury that's kept him out for the majority of the offseason and training camp. And at least the Steelers and the Cowboys have 2 of the most elite defenses in the NFL. So they're really good on at least one side of the ball. So not the most disappointing. Well, Jonah, what about the Las Vegas Raiders? The Raiders are also 0-2, which we didn't necessarily expect through these first 2 weeks of the season. Well, with the Raiders, again, yes, Derek Carr hasn't been playing well. He's been playing poorly, in fact, through the first 2 games this year. But at least their first loss of the year came at the hands of the Chargers, who in many people's eyes are one of the best teams, not only in the AFC, but just in the NFL, period. So they lost under a touchdown by 5 points in what was technically a road game at SoFi at the LA Chargers. So is that the worst? Is it a crime to lose to the Chargers? No, not particularly. They're loaded from top to bottom. Well, they lost to the Arizona Cardinals. Yep, they blew a 20-0 lead. That was pretty bad. But at least you can go to sleep at night understanding why, because they've got Kyler Murray on the other side, who's a special quarterback. Yes, there wasn't any DeAndre Hopkins. Yes, you're up 20-0. It's disappointing. There's no question about it. You should win that game at home, but you're going up against a special quarterback. So I don't look at the Raiders either with their 0-2 start as the most disappointing. What about the Denver Broncos? They're 1-1. They've looked really abysmal offensively through the first 2 games. Nathaniel Hackett looks like he's in over his head, like he's bitten off more than he can chew. And they just haven't looked fluid at all. They are 1-1 with a loss to Seattle and a narrow win over the Houston Texans. Well, still not very impressive at all. In fact, very disappointing. But again, we can look at those 2 teams and say, okay, it wasn't pretty. It was ugly against the Texans, but they did win. And against Seattle, Russ is returning home. It's an emotional environment. They did kind of handily manhandle the Seattle Seahawks for the first 95 yards of the field, and then they just fumbled it twice inside the 2. Is that supposed to be happening every single time for them? Probably not. So it's certainly disappointing, and their offense has been sputtering for whatever reason. It doesn't look great in Denver, but I wouldn't say that's the most disappointing. And same thing with the Tennessee Titans. The Titans are 0-2. They obviously got surprisingly beat by the New York Giants, although perhaps the New York Giants are looking to be a more decent team. They're undefeated right now. So that was shocking to lose to Brian Daboll in his first season in the Giants. And then they just got humiliated and embarrassed by the Buffalo Bills on national television. But again, we kind of expected that. There's no A.J. Brown. So we knew the offense was going to take a step back. Ryan Tannehill, there are inherent limitations on what this team can do. So I always tempered my expectations with the Titans. So to me, they're not the most disappointing team at 0-2. The most disappointing team right now, and it pains me to say this, is the Indianapolis Colts. What are they doing? They're 0-1-1, and their games have been to the Houston Texans and the Jacksonville Jaguars. They tied the Texans on the road. Yes, the first 2 games have been on the road. I get it. It's harder to win on the road. They tied the Texans on the road in overtime, which, again, they were in position to win that game multiple times, and they couldn't close the deal. And at Jacksonville, it's not just that they lost. It's one thing to lose a game. But they were set to a cold wash, downy, blanket 24-0 loss to the Jacksonville Jaguars, which is unfathomable to not be able to score even a field goal, to be totally just handcuffed offensively the entire game. This is an NFL team. And yes, I know the Jacksonville Jaguars are getting better, and they've got some better players now, but again, it's not just the loss, but it's the fashion that they lost. Their offense can't do anything. Matt Ryan has not panned out for them, unfortunately, and it pains me because I love Jonathan Taylor. But how many years have we been saying about the Indianapolis Colts? They've got a near perfectly constructed roster, and they're a Super Bowl away. They're one quarterback away from a Super Bowl. We've been saying that the last 3 years. Well, Phillip Rivers wasn't the answer. Carson Wentz wasn't the answer. Now Matt Ryan clearly looks like he's aging. He's not the answer. Doesn't look like at the moment. And I get it. They didn't play against the Jags they played without Michael Pittman Jr., but still did not put up any points against the Jaguars to be that regrettably bad offensively. It's just shocking with a guy in Frank Reich who's a really good coach and a brilliant mind. So that part's been really shocking. I mean, Matt Ryan, 1 touchdown, 4 interceptions through the first 2 games of the season. So, I mean, Jim Irsay is probably writhing in his bed at night saying, how is this happening? How is this happening? So fortunately for the Colts, they've got a very easy remaining schedule. Being a part of the AFC South, it's not the most brutal schedule. It's not a gauntlet that they have coming up. So there's time to rewrite the ship and turn it around. But so far, they've been extremely disappointing to start the season, and I really hope that they can turn things around, because I'd love to see if they can make some noise in the AFC.